Sean here with BaseMint Comics, and it's Wednesday, September 17th, 2025, and Henry and I are about to hit the trails to head up to our local comic shop to pick up this week's books. So let's take a ride. And we're back from the ride. First off, if you like what I've been doing on the channel so far, if you could like, comment, and subscribe, that would be awesome. And I also have a Instagram page. It's BaseMint Comics on Instagram, spelled BaseMint Comics. So, got back from the shop, and these are the books that we picked up, and there's a couple extras at the end. So first up is Uncle Scrooge, Earth's Mightiest Duck. The little guy has been on a DuckTales kick, so this sort of, winds up being one of those things that might possibly wind up being a bedtime story sometime in the future when he's a little bit older. So I've kind of been holding on to any DuckTales stuff that's been happening in the DuckTales and the what ifs, like what if Goofy was Iron Man, and what if Mickey and friends were the Fantastic Four, and all that type of stuff. Then Magic number 10. I am a huge fan of Magic and a huge fan of Danny Moonstar, and I truly wish that this series was better than it actually is. So I'm not sure if this one is continuing on after the Age of Revelation thing either. I would be surprised if it was. Was kind of hoping for a little bit more. It's been more enjoyable than Laura Kinney, and I can't even think of the other one that's been kind of Psylocke. I liked it more than Psylocke, so there you have it. Deadpool and Wolverine. I am not the biggest Deadpool guy. I liked early, not his first appearance. I mean, I have his first appearance and I was around for all of that, but my kind of sweet spot for Deadpool was like the Circle Chase, the Fabian Nicieza and the Joe Madureira miniseries, and then the Ian Churchill drawn one that came out a year or two later maybe, and then I liked the initial run of Joe Kelly's. I think, but this Benjamin Percy written series has actually been much better than I initially anticipated, because I was kind of like, oof, felt it sort of, not the biggest Deadpool guy, which we're going to talk to actually in the next one. Shockingly, I picked up Deadpool and Batman #1. This I picked up. I sort of wish it had been anyone but Deadpool, Daredevil, Captain America, anybody. But thankfully, there is a Kevin Smith written Green Arrow and Daredevil story that's drawn by Adam Kubert, I think, or Andy, not sure which one. And there is a Chip Zdarsky written Captain America, Wonder Woman story. I know nothing really about most of those DC characters, but for the Green Arrow and Daredevil story, I was willing to pick this up and give it a shot. And since I often say that I am not a DC guy, which I'm not, but I am, however, a big fan of Mark Waid and Chris Samney, so I have been picking up Batman and Robin Year One from them. I view like Waid and Samney kind of as like the new Loeb and Sale, and I've been enjoying this. It isn't necessarily, I kind of went through this thing where, like with Hank, where I'm like, maybe I should have some Batman and Superman lying around the house, just in case he gravitates towards those, as opposed to the vast library of Marvel that he's going to grow up with. But then I really enjoyed the Superman movie, hopped on board Slott's Superman Unlimited and picked up the first couple issues of Wade's, and just sort of like, it's just not, it's not for me. It's not, just kind of one of those things where I'm like, I don't, like completely a newbie with no idea what's going on. And I'm just like, man, I already spent too much on new books to begin with. I shouldn't be adding stuff. But I really like Waid and Samney. Loved their Daredevil run. Loved the tiny short run that they did of Captain America. And so this just feels like, a very like throwback era thing, kind of with Samney's art. And so I've been enjoying the series, but it's probably not gonna stick around. I'm probably gonna either unload it on eBay for cheap, or give some kid dressed up like Batman the entire run come Halloween. So there's that. You can't accuse me of never trying to give DC books a shot, even though they never stick. Every time I try to dip my toes in, it's just not my cup of tea. And that's okay. Up next, this is actually one of the surprise X-Men books for me, is Phoenix. Really been enjoying this title, so looking forward to that one actually continuing on. Then Amazing Spider-Man #12, or 976 if you're old like me. And this series, like, I really, really, really enjoyed the last issue with the split and kind of understanding why there were two Spider-Man running around. I kind of like where this is headed, I think, and I just really enjoyed it. So definitely looking forward to this issue. And then Fantastic Four #729. I could go on and on about how much I'm enjoying Ryan North's run on Fantastic Four and One World Under Doom. It's been great to have like the Fantastic Four back, and I thoroughly enjoyed Hickman's run. Was very, very disappointed that Marvel kind of made them go away for a long time, but really loved Dan Slott's run, and this has just been like top tier, one of my favorite Marvel books. Possibly, I'm pretty sure that it's my favorite Marvel book. The problem is that it always comes out at the same time as Uncanny X-Men, and this is #721. Really been enjoying what Gail Simone has been doing with this title. It's been a lot of fun. It feels like the X-Men of my youth, a little bit smaller of a group. Definitely like has that Gen X feel with the kids kind of incorporated into the team slowly, with only it just being the four of them. I really like that. And this and Fantastic Four are probably right now my two favorite Marvel titles. So those are the new books that we picked up. And then I grabbed some extra stuff. I grabbed this 1976 Bucky Topps sticker because it says, "How do you like a knuckle sandwich?" And I just think that's hilarious. Then I grabbed the Mighty Thor Annual 13 which has got this great Walt Simonson cover. I have the entire Walt Simonson run. That's basic. Like, I have some one-off issues of Thor. I'm a real big fan of the character Firelord because Uncanny X-Men, like 105, I think he like trashes Jean's apartment in that issue, and that was one of the first back issues that like I got on this like day trip that I did with my mom, where we went around to comic books. We like looked comic book stores up in the phone book, and she drove me around as I was getting back issues, and that was an older back issue that I got, so I've always just been intrigued by that character. So I've got a lot of Firelord appearances in Thor, but then a solid chunk with the Walt Simonson stuff. I read it years ago when I was doing my first kind of reread of all the X-Men stuff in a row, since Simonson's Thor ties in. It's a Mutant Massacre. I was like, oh, I'd kind of like to know what's going on. It's hailed as one of the greatest Thor runs, so I was like, that should be it. I really don't feel like a collection is complete without the annuals that happened during it, even if they're not done by the same creative team. Annuals are fun. I particularly liked them back in the day because it just felt like a big, fun, like summer blockbuster, sort of like one and done issues done by cool creative teams. And so this one is, I don't know, Alan Zelenitz is the scripter, but the art's by John Buscema, and it looks pretty good. Fun Mephisto story, and like, look at that great double page spread. I mean, that's worth the $5 I shelled out for this back issue. And then they tossed in a couple free tickets to a convention that is happening not this weekend but the following weekend, and I'm excited about it. It's not a big convention, but it has Jim Salicrup, who is coming there, and there's a reason why that excites me. So Jim Salicrup is the editor of, well, lots of stuff in 70s and 80s Marvel, but I have been, this Dark Phoenix Saga trade was the very first like comic book Christmas present that my folks ever got me. I have the issues. That was actually, sadly, the last Christmas. It's a weird little bookend thing. This was when I got into comics, this was the first comic book Christmas present that they got me. And when the last Christmas before my mother passed, she got me all the single issues of the Dark Phoenix Saga. So I tend to read this at every Christmas, and I've been working on getting everyone who worked on the book to sign it. So it's signed by John Byrne. There's some dialogue by Chris Claremont from when I met him, and a beautiful Banff lettered by Tom Orzechowski when I met him. And so Jim Salicrup edited this. So I was like, hey, I get to add his name to the thing. And another person who's going to be there is Michael Golden, who I've met before, and had him sign a Marvel Fanfare issue that I'm about to talk about in Cornerbox Classics. And he signed my Avengers Annual number 10. And so today I picked up Micronauts number 1, because my old pal Jerry loved the Micronauts, and I was like, well, I found a copy of issue 1 for cheap, and that seems like it's the priciest of the Micronauts series, so then maybe I can fill the rest of that series in you know, dollar bin finds or whatever. So that, and thank you for the tickets to the shop. That'll be fun to do. And so that is our weekly bike ride to the comic shop this week. So up next, we have some Cornerbox Classics from December 8th, 1981. So let's head on over for that. Thanks. This button. So first up in the Cornerbox Classics, we've got Amazing Spider-Man number 226. But the Cat Came Back from December 1st, 1981, written by Roger Stern with pencils by John Romita Jr., inks by Jim Moody, letters by Joseph Rosen, and colors by Bob Sharon. So Amazing 226 opens up with the Fool Killer being taken to a hospital. Obviously, he sees Spider-Man in the lightning. He's freaking out about it. And it turns out that this is the same hospital that Black Cat's at. She was put there after basically, like, she, you know, had the shrine to Spider-Man in her last apartment. And so she's kind of going over this to her nurse who isn't paying attention to her. And clearly you can see, like, she knows what she's doing, basically overpowers the nurse, which isn't that difficult, ties her up and makes her escape. And so Jean DeWolf is on the case and basically explains that Black Cat got released. So Pete's pretty freaked out by that. Black Cat is back to her old tricks, and she is stealing a painting and then pays off this horse and carriage rider to not turn around and take a look at her and just get her out of there. So Pete's been searching for her, goes back to his apartment, and is like, I don't know where she's hiding. Like, I can't find her anywhere. And man, I got to do laundry tonight. So he goes to the laundromat, tries to chat up this girl who is clearly very uninterested. Then turns out that Felicia is also doing laundry that night and comes up with the idea to skywrite a message to Spidey for them to meet where their first date is. So he's, busy with his TA job and winds up catching wind of this and goes to take a look. He and Black Cat meet up. And great subscription ad for the Christmas season with the thing there dressed as Santa. And obviously, like, she decides, like, she's like, okay, we're going to meet at this costume party, which just so happens to be the costume party of the person that she just stole the painting from. So she runs into who she thinks is Spider-Man. It isn't. Gets that guy in trouble with his wife. And there's Pete dressed as a Jawa. So she basically makes some comments to the guy, the guy that she stole the painting from, tipping him off that she was the person who stole the painting. So a fight ensues. And then, they kind of, Spider-Man does his thing. Black Cat does her thing. The Magi boss tries to get away. And it turns out that Jean DeWolf is there. And during all this, Black Cat is basically like, oh, hey, I'm going to go straight. And we're going to see how that goes. So that was 226, which was a pretty fun, like, the more that I read, I'm currently reading Avengers, which had a pretty great Jed MacKay written Black Cat story. And all of the stuff that I've been reading from the beginning with Black Cat has made me like the character even more. And I keep on doing these little recap things on this blanket, and I just wanted to say that this was lovingly made by a buddy of mine named Jerry. He and I used to host an X-Men podcast. We've been friends for years, and this blanket was a baby blanket made for Hank by his wife Mel, and I love it, and obviously always going to have it, not just because it's X-Men related, but because, it was Henry's first baby blanket, so that's nice. So that's the story behind that. I've got Captain America 267, The Man Who Made a Difference, from December 1st, 1981, written by J.M. DeMatteis, pencils by Mike Zeck, inks by John Beatty, letters by James Novak, and colors by Bob Sheeran. Cap 267 opens up with Cap doing a high school speaking engagement, and he's taking questions from the crowd. And then another kid comes up, and he's upset about, the distribution of wealth, poverty, just basically kind of disillusioned at this point. Pulls out a gun, starts firing. Cap, obviously overpowers him, gets the principal out of the way. And then this kid winds up, snapping on Cap, basically explaining how disillusioned he is, and spits on him. And so Cap walks away frustrated, not necessarily by the fact that this happened, but a little bit by the fact that, the kid is making some points that he doesn't necessarily disagree with, but more so disagrees with, obviously, the way that he went about it. So then we cut to Steve's brownstone, where he's hanging out, listening to music, and having dinner with Bernie Rosenthal. She tries to put the moves on him. Cap rebuffs it. Explains that he's got some stuff on his mind, obviously, because he was just shot at by a teenager. And Bernie's like, listen, man, we got to figure this out. Like, you're on another planet. And she's bummed out because he's been, like, rebuffing her advances. And, she walks away dejected. And then we cut to this, like, I guess, abandoned building where Everyman and his group is talking about what happened. And clearly that guy was a member of Everyman's group. And basically he's saying, like, oh, yeah, he went about it the wrong way. And it should have been me doing it. So obviously you can see him pull out his little sword with a laser, which is a pretty weird weapon. So then Cap bikes over to Bedford Stuyvesant, runs into some kids. The older kids are messing with Cap, and then he goes up there, and the little kid convinces him, like, hey, Cap's one of the good guys. And so at the same time that this is happening, Everyman is, like, attacking people in New York. And then we cut to Avengers Mansion, where Tigra is still there, even though she left last issue. And Cap obviously brings some of the kids from the neighborhood back to Avengers Mansion, along with the older kids from the neighborhood, or older teens. I don't know. It's the 80s, so these guys look 40, but I think they're meant to be, late teens, early 20s. And so Everyman basically, like, calls out Cap on TV after his little attack and winds up killing 2 cops. So Cap, pissed, takes off and heads towards Everyman, where he kind of explains, like, how he got to be where he is, which is, like, his dad worked, and, like, his mom, she passed away, and he was kind of hoping, like, his kid would live the American dream. His dad got sick, couldn't afford the medical bills. Those were piling up, and, like, by the time he died, his son couldn't even afford the funeral, which, I mean, obviously, there's a bit of that disillusionment going on these days. So he, like, says all this while he's planning to meet Cap for their little showdown at the Statue of Liberty. It's pretty easy for Cap to take this dude down. And he winds up taking one of his own people hostage. And basically Cap just kind of shows him a show of force and talks him down from this, takes him out. And, like, all the other kids that are watching this are like, oh, that was a good way to handle that. And that is sort of how this issue ends. And so, not my favorite issue of the run, but also not a bad issue. A little bit, interesting to kind of read during these times. Avengers 217, Double Cross, from December 8, 1981, written by Jim Shooter, pencils by Bob Hall, who also did the plot, inks by Dan Green, letters by Joseph Rosen, and colors by Christy Scheel. Really enjoyed this Avengers issue, number 217. So it opens up with this, like, guy in a mech suit, basically, thrashing the outside of Avengers Mansion. And so Jarvis is like, you better figure this out. And so Iron Man goes out there, and while that's going on, Janet shows up in a new limo, and she basically just, like, strolls past the dude, ignoring him, because she's like, oh, Iron Man can handle this. And then Cap shows up, and he is like, what's going on? Need any help? And Iron Man's like, no, I got this. And so he just heads into the mansion, and this dude's getting more and more frustrated that, like, they're all ignoring him. And so he eventually, obviously, is defeated by Iron Man, gets arrested, and is just sort of, like, happy that he can be like, oh, man, I took on Iron Man. So then, Iron Man's worried that he hasn't heard anything from Hank Pym. Then it cuts to Hank. They kind of explain what's been happening in the last few issues with, like, Hank getting court-martialed. He created a robot to kind of attack that, and it went awry. The whole Janet thing happened. And so Hank makes a call to Stark International, and there is a different secretary there, not Mrs. Arbogast. And Mrs. Arbogast, like, she's basically, like, the old, or the new, like, villain secretary is like, oh, man, somebody's calling saying that they know who Iron Man is. This happens all the time. She just ignores him, basically. Mrs. Arbogast shows up. And when she mentions who was on the phone, she flips out because she's like, oh man, Tony's been trying to get a hold of Hank. But by the time that she picks up the phone, he's gone. And so in reading the Iron Man issues, because I had never read, I'd only read, issues here and there of classic Iron Man, but reading like the David Michelini run, I've actually grown to quite like Mrs. Arbogast. I was kind of bummed that in retrospect that she was like never mentioned or used in the Iron Man films. So then we cut back to the Avengers mansion. Janet basically like they're doing their meeting, and Janet offers up the position of her being the chairman, and nobody disagrees with it, so she winds up becoming the chairman. Then we cut back to Hank, who's at a bar drinking, and up shows Egghead. And I have never read any Egghead appearances before, zero history. So I went to what I believe to be, instead of like Googling him on the internet, because that's boring, I went to what I use when it comes to finding out about characters that I don't know about, which is the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, because that's way cooler than Wikipedia. But unfortunately, when this was published, Egghead was so obscure and not used that he didn't even warrant a page in the Ohatmu. So that's kind of a bummer. And he doesn't have a trading card because I looked there next. But obviously, one of the things that they did well back then was they give you a quick recap where obviously Egghead was one of the people that Janet and Hank dealt with during like the Tales of Suspense stuff, which I've not read. I've read all of his obviously Avengers appearances, but none of the Tales of Suspense stuff. So it turns out that he was experimenting on his niece, Tristar. Iron Man stopped this, but during all of this, Egghead caused her to lose an arm. And so he has created a mechanical arm for her to use. And he just wants her to give her a note, and he's willing to pay Hank a pretty hefty sum of money to just deliver this, because he's like, she's not gonna take it from me because I'm a quote unquote villain. So I'd love it if, take this money and you can deliver it. And so Hank's skeptical, but he like takes a look at the thing, doesn't have a problem with it. So he shows up at her house. She's excited to see him. He's like, I've tested this out. He puts it on her, and then all of a sudden it starts going haywire. And I found that panel to be hilarious because it's somewhat reminiscent of what Hank just did to Janet. So I don't know if that was done purposely. So then she starts talking like she's Egghead, and Hank realizes like, oh, like I've been duped, and Egghead has taken control of her and is basically like, I'm going to kill her if you don't do what I want you to do, because I'm controlling her remotely through this arm. So Hank is then told to, break in. And so he's following Egghead's orders, does all this to try to get some missiles and some they're like adamantium. So he's going through all that. And then he's getting away with it, and the Avengers show up. But they don't realize that it's Egghead. And so they just think Hank has gone even crazier. And so they're taking on Hank. And they wind up like right as Egghead realizes that they're defeated, he basically like shuts down his control of the arm, and his niece has no recollection that because of something that Egghead had done while in control of the arm, has no recollection that Hank had shown up or any of the Egghead stuff. She just thinks that Hank like took her hostage. And so it obviously ends on a bum note with the Avengers. Sad that Hank is now also jailed. So that was actually a really fun issue of the shooter era of writing for Avengers has been hit or miss for me, but I actually really enjoyed this issue. This was a pretty good one. Marvel Fanfare number 1, Fast Descent into Hell from December 8th, 1981. Written by Chris Claremont with pencils, inks, and colors by Michael Golden and letters by Jim Novak. Marvel Fanfare number 1 would have been an issue that I would have picked up on, what is it? December 8th, 1981? All right. And so this, signed to me by Michael Golden when I met him a few years back, features Sauron, which I love. He's one of my favorites. So this obviously opens up with Tanya Anderson flying out to get Angel's help, and she runs into Candy Southern when she gets to the Aerie, and she explains to Warren that she's looking for Sauron. Carl Lycos gives kind of a recap on what happened in those early Roy Thomas, Neil Adams issues that introduced Sauron. And she's like, I thought he was dead in Tierra del Fuego. He saved my life. Like, I was in love with Carl Lycos, but my father disapproved. Like, I've just been under the assumption since then that he's been dead. But there was like an article written in the paper about the Savage Land. And in the photo, she notices that she's like, that's Carl Lycos. So she's trying to get Warren to go to the Savage Land to find him. It's like very reminiscent. One of my favorite books and films from when I was younger is obviously is Jurassic Park. And so I've always kind of dug the Savage Land for a little bit of that kind of being connected. And this felt a little bit like when Hammond shows up and offers Ellie Sattler and Alan Grant the money to go to the island the first time. I actually read that. I was the summer before that movie came out, my mom and I both got a really, really terrible case of pneumonia. Like, I was on a breathing machine most of my summer vacation, which sucked. But my folks let me read. I was way too young to understand most of it, but I read the book Jurassic Park about a year before the movie came out. And probably read it, like, if not every year, at least every 2 to 3 years. Just love it. Anyways, that also factors into my love of Sauron and all that stuff. So this kind of just reading it kind of gave me that vibe of that initial, like, you know, she offers him donating money to a charity and he turns it down, but then she gets upset and he's basically like, all right, I'll do it. And so then we cut to the Daily Bugle as Warren is working on getting clearance to get into Antarctica. And Jameson is basically like, we got to send somebody with him down to investigate this. And so Pete has some experience because in Amazing Spider-Man issues 103 and 104, both him and Jameson were in the Savage Land. Pete's not going for it because he barely made it out alive that time. But obviously, Robbie, you know, is like, hey, if you pay him, he'll go. And so eventually Jameson, you know, coughs up some cash, and we cut to them flying in via helicopter. And everybody's kind of going through their motions of why they're there. A pterosaur suddenly shows up, crashes into the helicopter, which is so very Savage Land. Like, I don't think anyone's ever, like, landed in the Savage Land. It's always crash landings, which I'm okay with, because it's a lot of fun. Pete does this web parachute thing. The pencils by Michael Golden. I think he inks and colors this issue because I didn't see anyone else listed in the credits. There's a letterer, but pretty sure he does all the art, which is fantastic. They run across Garak's Citadel, which we last saw in the like early hundreds of X-Men. Great storyline. The Garak thing was a ton of fun. And they get attacked by some of the Savage Land mutates. You can see a very, like, Angel doesn't see her, but that's clearly Vertigo that's messing with him. And so Pete does this typical, like, I'm going to pull my punches a little bit so that nobody knows that I'm Spider-Man. But then panels later after he pushes Tanya into a river to get her away from the mutates, changes into his Spider-Man outfit, which always cracks me up when he does that, because it's like everybody's going to realize, like, out of the people that are there, it only leaves one person left to be Spider-Man. So we're going to see how that goes. So he runs into Barbarous. Tanya and he gets like pummeled by him. And Tanya runs into a dinosaur. Pete wakes up groggy, realizing that he's, not been, he's been taken in. And so, they're introduced to the Brainchild is like introducing all of the other mutates that were created by Magneto in the Savage Land, and then it uses some type of ray on Spider-Man, which is clearly doing some type of change to him. So that's that. And then there's a backup story here drawn by Paul Smith, which is a Christmas issue by Daredevil, or with Daredevil. And I have a whole list of Marvel comics that I read every Christmas, and this was a pretty fun one, and so I will probably be adding to that. But Marvel Fanfare issue 1 was a ton of fun. Good Savage Land story, right up my alley. Uncanny X-Men 155. First Blood from December 8th, 1981, written by Chris Claremont, pencils by Dave Cockrum, inks by Bob Wyacek, letters by Joseph Rosen, and colors by Glennis Ween. In the last issue, Uncanny 155 opens up with a upset Cyclops talking to Storm about the revelation that she's been hiding the fact that Corsair is his father. He's pretty pissed off about this. They wind up getting teleported or tractor beamed into a Shi'ar warship, and the X-Men team that was in the Bermuda Triangle or Magneto's old base, they get teleported into. So everyone is back together. Wolverine's always ready to fight. And they're basically like, hey, Lilandra's been taken. We don't know what's going on, but we're trying to get to the bottom of this. And, Xavier's like, well, we can look into it too. But Shi'ar, untrusting of them, is like, we need to keep two people as hostages to know that you're on the up and up. So Xavier goes to give Kitty a hug, and then Psy blasts her basically with all his knowledge of the Shi'ar and leaves her and Nightcrawler there. The X-Mansion has obviously been destroyed in the last issue by the Sidrian Hunters. So the X-Men wind up going to Avengers Mansion. They put in a call to the Fantastic Four. None of them are around. The only one is Tigra, who still, even after leaving the team, is loitering at the mansion. The rest of the X-Men show up, explain kind of what's happening and what they're figuring out to do with Lilandra. Then we cut to Kitty and Nightcrawler. Kitty has been figuring out some of the Shi'ar technology, one of them being she can change her outfits. And so while she's been doing this, she slyly admits that she has been researching the rest of the ship. And the two of them, because Nightcrawler can teleport, hide in shadows, Kitty can walk through the walls, they were clearly the best choices to leave for kind of this reconnaissance mission. Xavier knew what he was doing when he chose those two to stick around. Then we cut to what gives me some Star Trek When They're Rescuing the Whales vibes, as these two are very Corsairs. Everybody's looking at him because he's dressed like that. That's kind of why it gave me that vibe. And they are targeted by the Brood, this is the first appearance of the Brood. And they are working with Deathbird. They blast Storm and Corsair with a ray, which shows them terrifying images and kind of drives them a little bit crazy. Tigra attacks Deathbird. Just an all-out battle ensues with these characters. Corsair's fighting his own kid, and then Xavier mind blasts them and pulls them out of whatever they were doing. And so they're like, oh, we got to take these guys on. Storm gets attacked by the Brood. Colossus gets blasted. And then Deathbird goes and they're all fighting the Brood and Deathbird. And then she winds up blasting them, throwing her javelin, and it turns out that Colossus has been killed by Deathbird's javelin just as the cops show up to arrest the X-Men. And I was hoping to show some of this like Dave Cockrum art in its like original form, because I have this artifact edition from IDW, and you can't see all of it. There we go. But this only covers Dave Cockrum's first run up to 107, which I mean is fantastic because it's a lot of early Shi'ar and Giant Size and X-Men 94 art. But there is nothing from his run when he came back to the title in this, so we can't compare or contrast any of the original art to what eventually, you know, you see in the printed comic book. But these are still wonderful books to have. And so there's some Dave Cockrum art. So yeah, Uncanny X-Men 155. So that wraps it up for this new comic book week and 2 weeks, December 1st and December 8th of 1981 of the Cornerbox Classics. And it was a buddy of mine who tossed me some feedback that he liked the different camera angle where I flipped through the book as I talked about it, as opposed to staring at my gorgeous face. So let me know in the comments if you prefer I just hold the book up and talk about them, or if you liked the different angle. And I'll see where we go from there. So thanks again for watching, liking and subscribing, and giving me any feedback or commenting on what you picked up this week or what you thought of any of those classics from 1981. So thanks for taking this ride with us. Bye.